Thank you, everybody, and a very warm good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone. As our speakers who have joined us here today are 12 hours apart, with Ellen at 6 a.m. In Washington and Dr. Chkheidze at 6 p.m. Manila time. We thank you for your time and joining us here today. I am Nidhi Prabha, and I am the GESI advisor for USAID South Asia Regional Energy Partnership Program, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before we begin, just wanted to kind of highlight some of the housekeeping items to note. Firstly, this session is recorded, and I hope you all are okay with the same. I also encourage all the participants to share your questions in the chat section, as well as, ask and kind of interact with the speakers during the interactive Q&A session that we have towards the end. Today, we are here for the last and concluding session of our CLA series on gender equality and social inclusion. Bouncing off on what we have discussed in the past two series, starting from the foundational aspects of gender equality and social inclusion. And then, moving on to project design stage and how to integrate GESI at the project design stage. Today, in the last and concluding session, we thought of rounding it off with a very important, node of GESI integration across the project lifecycle, which is monitoring, evaluation, and adaptation. So this last session is, I'm very thrilled to see the participants, some of our recurring participants, I must say, who have joined us for the previous sessions as well. So I welcome all of you. And as you all know, this session is a part of our broader initiative under the Clean Edge Asia program, which is hosted by the South Asia Regional Energy Hub, or SARE, which is a knowledge sharing, coordination, and communication platform housed within USAID's South Asia Regional Energy Partnership Program. And in today's session, we'll focus on the key three areas, which is about monitoring, evaluation, and adaptation for a resilient GESI integration in the clean energy ecosystem. And therefore, we are very, very honored to have distinguished speakers. Ellen Bomasang, who is the principal for Energy, Climate, and Gender at Abt Global, and Dr. Ketevan, who is from ADB. She's a gender specialist at the Asian Development Bank, and both of them will share their insights on this very, very crucial node. And therefore, without any further delay, I want to start by welcoming and introducing Monali Zia Hazra, who is the Regional and Clean Energy Specialist at USAID India. Monali has over 24 years of experience in the clean energy space and holds a postgraduate degree in environmental management from the Indian Institute of Social Welfare and Business Management. She's managed several of USAID's clean energy program and is a passionate gender champion. Monali, over to you for the welcome address.
Thank you so much, and a very good afternoon to all those who are joining from the region, and good morning to some of our speakers who are joining so early. Thank you so much for taking time and being part of this conversation. I'm not going to go into a spiel of how important gender integration is for USAID and for all our programming. But over the years, the importance of gender, or not importance, but the way how we are addressing gender in sectors such as technical as energy has changed. And through this CLA, it was an initiative, or rather an effort from our part, to see how we could also share these lessons with the others who may also be struggling with integrating gender in the energy sector, because it's not so easy, while if you are making a specific focused program which is addressing gender, that's much simpler, while you want to integrate gender in other activities which you are doing in the energy space. So hopefully the CLA series, which Nidhi laid out, basics, then in the next one, looking at the design, and now in important aspect, the monitoring as well as budgeting, how we are looking into it and how we are addressing it it's really useful. Again, for USAID, we've been trying to address it in several means, whether it is by setting up a platform for highlighting, the importance of integrating gender in the private sector, in the energy sector with the USISPF, United States India Strategic Partnership Forum, which is an Indo-US business forum. We have partnered with them to set up this platform called SAVI, or South Asia Women in Energy, which the basic aim is to promote women leadership in the energy sector and highlight the importance of why we should be looking at mainstreaming gender in sectors such as energy. We are also undertaking several interventions in terms of, working at the ground root with entrepreneurs, with local micro level entrepreneurs in terms of engaging them and empowering them to use, energy as a source of income, whether it is selling and operating and being marketing agency for services such as this. And then within SAREP, there are several interventions where we are trying to work with our partners to bring in policies and practices which will help mainstream gender in their activities. So these are various ways in which USAID, in particularly through SAREP and our grants under SAREP, we've been trying to address mainstreaming of gender. Looking forward to our discussions today. This has been, as mentioned, very useful series, not only for general participants, but also for me to understand how the other partners are doing. So I'm really looking forward to listening to our two experts today. And thank you to all of you who have joined. This is really, an exchange of ideas. So look forward to the discussion. With that, let me turn it back to you after once again welcoming to our last series in the CLA. Over to you, Nidhi.
Thank you, Manali, for that background and setting the stage for how we curated this, not only this series, but our intent overall of pushing the and catalyzing the GESI agenda. But before we begin, because as we are doing this in the evening today, I would request all our participants to switch on their cameras so that we can click a screen grab, and then we'll jump into our first speaker session. So kindly request all our participants to switch on their cameras, and our team will quickly grab some screen shots. Thank you. So I'm going to prompt everybody to smile at 1, 2, 3, and then Aishwarya on our team will help us grab some screenshots. So smile, everybody. 1, 2, and 3. Aishwarya, let us. Okay, thank you, Aishwarya. So before let me first now quickly introduce our first speaker, Ellen Bomasang. As I said, Ellen is currently the principal for Energy, Climate, and Gender at Abt Global. She's based out of Washington and has been a development professional with nearly 3 decades of experience in the clean energy and climate change ecosystem. And she works at the intersection of gender and social inclusion across, emerging economies in Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe, Latin America, and the Middle East. She's a trained economist and is also currently pursuing a PhD in international development at the University of Birmingham, UK. And in her research, she's examining the inequalities women of color face in US international development industry using critical race theory and intersectionality. Ellen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nidhi. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. So I will share my screen. So thank you for having me here. It's really a pleasure to be here and to kind of round up such a what sounds like a really great CLA series and to share some insights. So for my portion today, I'm hoping that participants gain a greater appreciation of why GESI, or gender equality and social inclusion, matters in monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Or MEL, be better versed in GESI and energy performance metrics, gain the tools to ensure that data collection and analysis are gender responsive and inclusive, learn some of the principles of GESI responsive evaluations. I'll also share a few examples that highlight some best or leading practices in this space. So, my portion focuses on monitoring and evaluation for GESI Impact. I think we have a nice mix of folks in the audience, but I think we've all been exposed to MEL in different degrees. So, but before we talk about integrating GESI considerations, so why is MEL important? So first, of course, it helps us track the progress of activities. It also helps us identify trends to make sure that our activities are on schedule. It highlights what's working well and, of course, what's not working well. And so that facilitates database decision making. Very important also, it helps identify challenges and problems to take corrective measures in a timely manner. And extremely critical, it promotes accountability. So ultimately, we're accountable to our funders, to our partners, and most importantly, to the communities that we aim to serve. So here's a quote: "You can only improve what you can measure." So this quote has been attributed to Lord Kelvin, who's a Scottish-Irish physicist. Some have also attributed it to Peter Drucker, who invented management consulting, though I think his version was what gets measured gets managed. Some people have also attributed it to Yoda, though I think he probably would have phrased it a bit differently. But regardless of who said it, I think it quite nicely encapsulates the importance of MEL. But speaking of Yoda, I think one quote we can definitely attribute to him is "pass on what you've learned," which I think also applies to the principle of learning, sharing knowledge, and applying that knowledge. So that's still, very much applies to MEL. So let's start with the M in MEL monitoring. So there are 3 types of monitoring approaches. So I should preface this by saying this is the way USAID classifies monitoring approaches. And there are slight differences or nuances with other donors, but I think the key principles apply. So I'll focus on performance monitoring. So simply, performance monitoring involves the ongoing and systematic collection of performance indicator data and other information. So both qualitative and quantitative, to reveal whether your implementation is on track and whether results are being achieved. So we're looking at 3 things here: quantity, quality, and timeliness of activity outputs. So we're also monitoring project and strategic outcomes resulting from the combination of these outputs. So before we proceed to the next few slides, which go deeper into GESI, let's do a quick survey. So with your phones, you can use this QR code in the screen or click on the link in the chat. I will go to the survey. I'll stop sharing this and go to another. So yeah, the first question is, what percent of the global energy workforce do women comprise? I think majority have picked the first option, which is 16%. That's the right answer. Hold on, I have too many things on my screen. So the next question is, what percent of the global renewable energy workforce do women comprise? Should be able to. Are you able to get to it in your phones or in your laptops?
We're able to see,
Are you able to vote?
yes. No, I think the older question is still somehow reflecting on the Mentimeter. No, we can see
No.
the percentages now. Yeah.
It's not showing up.
I think you'll have to go to the next slide, Ellen, on the Mentimeter, because it says you've already responded to this question.
Can
Yeah.
you guys see this one?
Yes, I am able to see this question now. Yeah. I think you'll have to refresh the participants. I think just try refreshing your web page once, and I think you'll be able to see it. And then you can submit.
Okay, this worked during my test here, but if it doesn't work, it's fine.
It's okay. I think we can
Anyway, so for the second question, the answer is 32%. And most of you probably got that. I mean, the takeaway from the first two questions is that really women are underrepresented in the energy workforce. The numbers in the renewable energy sector are better, but I guess the message is that they're still outnumbered. And the questions are about women, but I should qualify that when we're talking about GESI, we're not just talking about women. We're also not talking in binaries. And of course, there's that social inclusion aspect as well. And this third question really just reinforces the key message from our earlier sessions, which is the importance of considering the different needs and perspectives of our, women, men, youth, various populations, persons with disabilities, etc., when planning and implementing energy projects, ensuring that there's diversity in the workforce. Let me go back to my PowerPoint. and ensuring diversity in the workforce, especially during this global, clean energy transition, when the energy sector is undergoing a massive transformation. So, why does GESI matter in MEL? So obviously, women, men, youth, and these other different populations have different energy needs, priorities. So many of these are dictated by social roles and existing inequalities. And we tackled these in the earlier sessions. So tracking resources allocated for GESI improves transparency and drives greater accountability. Using a GESI lens in MEL also ensures that all voices are heard. So, and finally, using a GESI lens in MEL also helps build the case for taking GESI seriously. So this slide lists some of the questions that GESI responsive M&E questions tries to answer. So things like who is participating and who is benefiting from the project? What is keeping individuals from equally participating and benefiting? Are there any unintended or harmful effects caused by your activities? Are there any changes in gender relations, workloads, etc. because of your activities? Are there any long-term impacts on things like health, education, etc.? So we've all probably encountered the phrase theory of change in our projects. So it's essentially what links your project outcomes and activities and explains the how and the why desired changes will happen. And it's developed at the project design stage. So to develop it, you begin with your long-term goal and then you work backward, identifying all the conditions necessary to achieve that goal. So a gender-responsive theory of change. So when the theory of change is being developed, it's important to take into consideration the differences in the conditions of women and men, girls and boys, people with disabilities, and other populations. And since it's being developed at the beginning of a program, you have an opportunity to build in activities and approaches to address those differences in conditions. So often donors will conduct a gender or GESI analysis to inform the theory of change. And so the GESI analysis identifies the GESI risks and challenges and how the project can promote GESI that establishes the baseline. So performance indicators. So we all here probably deal with performance indicators in our work, some of us more heavily than others. So I just wanted to provide a quick definition here so that we are all on the same page. So they are observable, standardized measures that are a key part of M&E systems. So they can be assessed both qualitatively or quantitatively, and they can vary quite a bit as contexts and priorities vary. So GESI indicators, so they're designed to, of course, measure outcomes of GESI focused as well as mainstream interventions and policies. They should be disaggregated by sex, age, socioeconomic background, and other variables as they are relevant to the project or program and the affected population in question. So they often measure things like access to resources, decision-making, participation, systems, and well-being. So measurement is often viewed as a technical and political exercise. So I say political because it often reflects the priorities of decision makers rather than the communities. I'll provide a few examples of GESI indicators in an energy program in a later slide. So in this slide, I have a few guidelines on how to develop GESI indicators. So very important, they should be developed in a participatory fashion with your stakeholders. They should be linked to your project problem statement, theory of change, and the gender action plan, if possible. And this aggregation should be required, and they must be clearly defined and technically sound. So a few good indicators is better. It should really not be a laundry list. Of course, they must be aligned with GESI data required by funders and implementing or executing agencies. So in this slide are just a couple of GESI indicators in an energy program. This is from an ADB project. So the goal is employment in the energy sector. Indicators include proportion of women, employment in energy agencies and utilities, and number of women in communities trained in on and off grid operations and maintenance. So as you all know, and this was probably tackled in the earlier sessions, women are often underrepresented in the energy workforce. So this makes complete sense. So this also lists the types of baseline data to be collected. So data collection and analysis. So the importance of, I already mentioned it earlier, but the importance of disaggregating data cannot be understated. So it's also important to collect both quantitative and qualitative data. So often people will just focus on the quantitative data, but the qualitative data will allow you to go deeper into personal experiences. There are many tools that you can use for gathering this data, which I'm sure you've all used or encountered. So there are household surveys, which are very widely used, and they can be done through online platforms, phone interviews, or in-person interviews. These days, you also see people using platforms like WhatsApp. Then you have focus group discussions, key informant interviews, in-depth interviews, observations, or when you're systematically watching and recording activities and behaviors and events. Document review, this involves like analyzing things like project-related documents. You have case studies, data management systems. So what are the GESI considerations in collecting data? So data collection methods need to represent your target groups. So be very alert to any voices that are being silenced. You have to ensure participation, and this may involve different ways of gathering data. For example, some people might be uncomfortable sharing their opinions in a group setting, so they might have to be interviewed one-on-one. Then ensure accessibility. So this could entail having translations to different languages or dialects. This could mean holding meetings at convenient times, like in the evenings or weekends, so that more people can attend. I remember one project. This was a rural electrification in Mindanao in the Philippines, and we were trying to hold stakeholder consultations, and many women could not join because of caregiving responsibilities. So what we did was to provide childcare support on site through the Department of Social Work. You need to also be mindful of any religious, cultural, or ethnic sensitivities involved in data collection. And then special expertise is needed if you're gathering data from people with a history of gender-based violence or trauma. So why am I bringing this up? Because as many of you know, there's a high incidence of gender-based violence in many energy and infrastructure project sites. So collection of data from persons with disabilities also requires specialized training. So your data collection officers need to be properly trained and sensitized. And then reflexivity is also important. So you need to be aware of your own biases as they may affect how you collect and analyze your data. And then when you share your findings, accessibility is also crucial. So you have to make sure you're using multiple formats like written, visual, and oral, and you may need to hold facilitated discussions. So moving to GESI responsive evaluation. So simply put, this is an assessment of the progress of the project towards achieving its GESI goals and objectives. So you're essentially looking at the degree to which gender and power relations change as a result of your intervention. So you should not just be measuring, for instance, the participation of women and other marginalized populations. Sadly, that's often the default. So a key facet of this is making sure that the process is inclusive, participatory, and respectful of all your stakeholders. A lot of these evaluations focus on the achievement of outputs or short and medium term outcomes, but there are also evaluations that look at impacts. So impact evaluations ask if the intervention made a difference, and like things like what specific part of the difference can be attributed to your project or activity. How was the difference made? Can the intervention be made to produce similar results elsewhere? So often a GESI evaluation includes an evaluation matrix. So that would summarize the key aspects of the evaluation exercise. Different donors use different templates, and we can share examples of these. Validity and reliability of data are critical, and you'll hear these terms quite often. And most evaluations involve the application of a gender analysis framework. This is just a systematic approach to examine the different GESI factors. So you've probably also seen GESI or gender rating scales used to assess the effectiveness of programs. I believe one of the earlier sessions already touched on this. So the screen shows the UNDP Gender Results Effectiveness Scale, or GRES, where results can be rated from gender negative, gender blind, gender targeted, gender responsive, or gender transformative. So we can also share links to examples of these. So in this and the next slide, I'll show some key questions to consider in GESI responsive evaluations. So I won't read them all out loud, but they cover the evaluation criteria, the evaluation actors, those doing the evaluation, and the stakeholders, and the evaluation process itself. So in the next few slides, I'll cover a few examples of energy and climate programs that highlight some leading practices. So there are many examples out there. So I'm tackling just a handful that I've either been directly involved with or am familiar with. So the first one is the USAID Nigeria Power Sector Program. So I worked on this program for 3 years from 2019 to 2022 as the project manager and senior GESI advisor. So NPSP was USAID's flagship program under its Power Africa umbrella. And its goal was to improve access to reliable and affordable electricity by adding 10,000 megawatts to Nigeria's generation capacity and 3 million new connections. And there were 4 outcomes outlined in the results framework, which are listed in this slide. So, so NPSP was a contract. So in the USAID world, it means the scope of work was already laid out when it was being bid out. So including the results framework, there were no GESI indicators. It did have a long list of 22 indicators, and they were tracking things like megawatts installed, number of connections, investments, funds leveraged, policies and laws, people trained, regulations. So there were no dedicated GESI indicators when USAID designed the program, but the USAID does require that GESI be integrated in all its projects. So the program was also fortunate in that it was led by a chief of party that was a GESI champion. So it was decided at the outset by the project leadership that they would do a GESI analysis and prepare a GESI action plan, and that they would informally track some GESI indicators. So the GESI action plan served as a blueprint for integrating GESI principles across the different components. And they also had some standalone GESI activities like a women's leadership initiative. So they decided to, so the informal GESI indicators were things like how many women-led companies they were supporting, how many women were trained in leadership skills. They, of course, disaggregated not just by gender, but other aspects of identity. So in terms of employing GESI sensitive data gathering methods, they sensitized partners on GESI principles at the outset. So this was critical as they relied heavily on local partners to carry out data collection in the field. They were also strategic in designing participant sampling approaches because they wanted to ensure that participant groups were as diverse as possible. They ensured that data gatherers were respectful of religious, cultural, and ethnic sensitivities. I think Nigeria has over 200 ethnic groups. And then in the Nigerian context, sometimes, especially in small groups, some women don't participate if men are present. So ensuring that their voices were heard was really key. So this sometimes meant doing all women meetings. Then they also employed GESI sensitive monitoring methods. They, of course, did the GESI analysis and action plan at the outset. They did regular GESI focused reviews. When there was a broader program review, like a midterm one, they made sure GESI was integrated in that. And of course, there was quantitative and qualitative monitoring. So the other program I wanted to talk about is this large global climate program, which is also USAID funded. This is an ongoing one and fairly new. So I'm involved in this as the senior GESI advisor. It's kind of unique in that it was designed to help USAID missions provide a range of services to countries to help meet their Paris Agreement obligations. So that includes helping countries update and implement their NDCs and NAPs. So unlike the previous example, this program has several indicators that are GESI focused, and they are listed in the 2 slides. I think there are 8 indicators that are GESI focused. So as you can see, they're not just, looking at women and girls here. There's also some targeted at indigenous indigenous communities. So in terms of what the program is doing, it's carefully managing data collection to ensure inclusion and diversity. We're disaggregating indicators and measuring and reporting accordingly. There are regular GESI briefings and training. We're doing a lot of qualitative data collection. And so we're also preparing success stories, causal pathways. So the last project I wanted to highlight is the USAID program is a USAID program in Southeast Asia called Enhancing Equality in Energy for Southeast Asia, or E4SEA. So it's a regional multi-year program covering several Southeast Asian countries. So it's unique in that it has an explicit energy and gender focus. So it may not resonate with some, as I think most folks here who work on projects work on exclusively energy focused projects and programs. But I did want to talk about it a bit just to showcase how far we've come. So if you look at the theory of change, it talks about diversity and increasing the pipeline of women and girls, inclusion in the energy sector, workplace environment, then equitable promotion and leadership opportunities. So this slide just shows you the results framework of the program. You can check this out more closely, as I think we will share the slide deck with you. And then this just shows a snapshot of the 3 outcomes and associated indicators. So I was not involved directly in this program, but I did coordinate with them while working on a regional energy program in Southeast Asia called USAID Smart Power Program. So the mail plan of E for SEA is available online, and we can share that link as well. So, having worked on energy projects and programs since the late 90s, the sector has really evolved. So I've worked on many programs where GESI was not even a consideration in the design stage, or certainly not in monitoring and evaluation. So you had to fight for it to be looked at as an issue. People were not making that connection that for projects to be sustainable, you had to consult all the stakeholders, that your different populations had different roles, needs, and perspectives, and that taking all of these into consideration leads to better designed programs, better implementation, and greater sustainability. So the evolution has been gradual from not being addressed at all, and it kind of evolved into a check the box type of exercise. And now there's so much greater awareness. Donors are putting money into this. The fact that there are now programs like E4SEA with an explicit energy and gender focus is proof of that. The fact that we're all here in this session is also proof of that. But of course, there's always room for improvement, and we have to be intentional. As I said earlier, it can still be a very political situation, but I think sessions like this really help a lot. So I'm very hopeful. So I think that's it for me. As I said, we'll share the slides and links, and yeah. Thank you.
Ellen, for this extensive learning session, I would say, on from the basics of what do we mean by monitoring and evaluation from a GESI responsive lens, and take us through examples and kind of illustrate the things that. And I think some of the key takeaways was that we need to look at a gamut of things, and we need to come up with the tailored approach of, let's say, what you mentioned about the rural electrification program in Philippines, and how for a stakeholder consultation you did provide, I mean, there was a room to provide care, for them, the care responsibilities, to cater to their care responsibilities. And I think that is the way, I think the a GESI responsive, but also a GESI transformative lens comes in place, where you are constantly looking for room for improvement, and that is what kind of informs that theory of change. Thank you. I will not we will have a round of of the key takeaways together, but thank you so much for that extensive, I would say, learning on the entire range of things that comes under a GESI transformative lens for monitoring and evaluation. And therefore, I would like to go to our second speaker, Dr. Ketevan Chkheidze, who is the gender specialist at Asian Development Bank. And she has a wealth of experience with a focus on gender mainstreaming across various operations at ADB, and currently with a tailored focus on South Asia. She has been an experienced practitioner in development sector who's committed to promoting gender equality across public and private sectors. And prior to focusing in South Asia, she also has worked in various diverse, I would say, regional and geographical areas, including East Asia, West Asia, and Central Asia, and across diverse sectors and projects of ADB. Spanning for over 15 years of professional experience. She has worked with a number of developmental organizations, including UN and others. She also has an academic background and, has been an author of few various publications, and she holds a PhD from Tbilisi State University, Georgia. And we look forward to your insights. So over to you, Dr. Chkheidze.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. I hope you can hear me well. So I will just go to my presentation and basically continue the discussion on the what Ellen started, but with maybe more focus and tailored approach or on how we practice at ADB and what are some of the good approaches. I would say maybe we're still thinking whether they are best or not, because working on gender and development and GESI is a constant learning process for development partners. Therefore, we have observed there are certain indeed good practices that we need to focus on. And that starts basically from overall approach of ADB as such, because I think it's very key whenever we work on a particular initiative or a project or a program to consider why it's needed to be why GESI or gender equality issues need to be addressed. And unfortunately, we still have to prove sometimes and bring evidence that there are inequalities, especially after the COVID, and especially in South Asia. And gender is not standalone, it's cross-cutting across sectors, but also with other forms of social exclusion. So I would like to move to ADB as such, because I think it is, as an example, you participants, you will be able to view how we link gender, working on gender and GESI to our overall, how to say, motto or objective, which is to focus on reducing poverty in Asia and Pacific and build prosperous, resilient, and sustainable countries and societies. And ADB long ago realized that this wouldn't be possible without very targeted approaches. And for us, as one of the development partners and multilateral development banks, gender is very strongly embedded in finance, knowledge, and partnerships. And these are the three areas of ADB's core businesses, but especially finance women, when we provide support for projects or grants, knowledges. If you look at ADB website, you can find a number of very useful sources that can, including on energy sector, that can really enrich the knowledge, and that is really looking at some of the practical areas of doing project. So accelerating progress in gender equality, it's important that just if we broaden this for any program or any organization or company, it's important that we have gender on a strategy level. Unless this is acknowledged, having more systematic approaches, whether it is design or implementation, monitoring of initiatives, won't be that sustainable. Therefore, having a strategy and embedded gender in a strategy is has been very important and pivotal for ADB also then to integrate gender and GESI approaches. And this also allows us later to monitor, measure achievements and see what is the progress that we make with our projects, with our funding. And you see here also the target, which is kind of baseline, what Ellen mentioned, the importance of it at the beginning. Therefore, for us also, there are a number of baselines that we aim to measure. This is very broader level. I'm speaking, I will move on to more specific considerations that maybe will be more useful for you. But again, South Asia, we recognize that there is a need for funding in the region. And then like energy is one of the biggest sectors for ADB. And however, looking throughout our projects, gender and GESI, because we have 70% target in our project, basically all projects undergo very detailed review to the extent possible with regard to resources and time, I would say, and interest and will from also from countries. But since energy is a large portfolio, ADB also are starting to look in more detailed approaches about how we can reduce some of the inequalities. How can we measure and how can we monitor the progress? So, and as I mentioned, gender equality in South Asian countries is persistent, and maybe also with regard to certain areas, it's even worse compared to other sub-regions, and it is intersected with the social inclusion, of course, aspects and vulnerabilities of communities. So for us, I won't go into these details, but if you look at the area of mainstreaming gender in ADB operations, and basically what has been a good practice is that gender monitoring and evaluation is part of the mainstreaming. So that's what, for us, what is important. So at mainstreaming, it is important to look at not only what is at the design stage of a project or a program, but also integrate it in the monitoring reporting mechanisms and track the implementation and the progress, and of course completion, and what are some of the results that we see or outcomes as part of our funding or interventions in a particular country. As I said, for South Asia, we particularly focus not only on gender equality and women's empowerment. We acknowledge that women are half of the population, and they are dominantly, I would say, they face discrimination number of areas and sectors predominantly. However, there are also other groups, vulnerable groups, and social excluded groups that ADB also started to have a look and make very tangible considerations in project. This is in particular with relations to South Asia. Considering that there was also interest from the countries of the region and governments. So that's why we are a little bit aligned, although on more on strategy level, we call it gender equality. So that's how we approach. So how we adapt to some of the gender and GESI challenges is that the resources are organized around these 4 areas that we find as part of, I would say, gender mainstreaming and monitoring and implementation, as well as project completion is part of this approach. Ellen mentioned the importance of indicators. Some introduced some of the measurements indicators later, but for ADB, what we see is a good practice is that from the very beginning to have indicators that we embed and integrate into project design, into program design, and then this is something then we stick to it, and then we monitor it and see what is the progress of achievements. So therefore, at very entry level, we think that there are certain processes that need to be in place that can later have monitoring and evaluation. So these are first of all, gender analysis, because we can't have those indicators or understand what are the problems unless we do a little bit of research or assessment, but sometimes it can be very in-depth if resources allow. Sometimes there are not such opportunities, but this is something, a very good practice that we see. Participation of women and community groups in consultations, because that helps us define very specific measures, both for projects, but also for then implementation and project completion. Baseline data, importance of which has been mentioned, because without that we won't be able to see what is the progress of our intervention. Most of our projects are really loans, as you may know. Some are grants, but whenever we have resources for grants or technical assistance programs, as we call them, then this allows more opportunities to gather more data, to introduce more mechanisms for implementation, to introduce innovative features, therefore, but again, that does not mobilization of this report does not take place all the time. So with regard to energy, we, in most of the cases, as we look at what is access and of women and other groups, try to introduce measures for capacity building, look at women from user perspective, skills and employment is another aspect. In our projects, we introduce, for instance, measures that can give scholarships to women, or we have had cases when there were some HR strategies developed that put very certain targets for women's career advancement in the energy sector, and having those specific targets for skills and employment, for instance, is very important, because then we can monitor. We can then see if there are challenges in implementation, what advice we need to give, or what support we need to give to implementing agencies. The private sector, which is an increasing area of funding, of giving, of lending, I would say, for ADB, and energy projects in private sector also have some of these measures, and we track their monitoring, implementation, and monitor the activities and the performance indicators. Therefore, this is something very new, I know, for private sector to, especially in the region. However, we already start to embed it into the operations. I'm sure you discussed these entry points at the previous session, so I will not stop here. However, common issues that we face at this stage is usually there is very limited data, segregated or disaggregated by other feature. If we talk about social inclusion, sometimes it's even impossible to establish a baseline, and then that may affect later definition of very specific targets and indicators. But again, we see that we need indicators, as this is something that we can measure. So the indicators that can be on a very output level, but also very outcome level. The outcome level gives a broader kind of idea what has project achieved, what is the difference that project has made. And for that, we need to, again, have, especially those are numeric targets, they are very important. Lack of in-depth gender assessment or consultations, sometimes they happen, but we see a good practice that's really to talk to women, to talk groups of women and men, because involving men and boys is equally important, especially there can be some vulnerabilities that are faced by men in certain contexts, areas, or cultures. However, we often see that there can be more devaluation of the gender equality, women's empowerment, or social inclusion at this stage. And there, usually, I have seen very rare cases when countries are very excited to or show vast interest. However, there are certainly, if we have some evidence, if we can show them that this is something that can improve, change, then there is, of course, more and more interest. Factors for consideration are availability of data, or if the data does not exist, then it's advisable that we collect baseline data. Consultations, which means that consultations with beneficiaries to identify their needs, but also with stakeholders. What can be potential partnerships, collaborations that can help drive the gender equality and GESI agenda forward? Indicators, yes, I will repeat several times the importance of the indicators when we want to measure progress, and it's important that they are smart, that we think of indicators that are really smart, that we're able to measure, that are specific, they're clear, and don't cause confusion later. And of course, aligned with the bigger picture of a program or a project. Sometimes we have such projects that are really standalone, for instance, targeted at women, right, or women's participation. But in energy projects, it's equally effective to embed those indicators in a project that can drive forward gender equality issues and help reduce some of the gaps. Comprehensiveness and intersectionality, I think I will combine the importance of these topics, because we shouldn't look at things like from narrow perspective, but consider how they interact. For instance, we see that women face difficulty in terms of affordability for energy services. But what is the reason behind that? How does it link to their employment? How does it link to their time poverty, which means that women don't have time because of poor infrastructure, other urban services, unavailability of those services. Women have a little time to focus on other activities now. So just if we look at certain areas and try to analyze in a more holistic manner, in an intersection with the related topics, then it can help really to see what can be potential impact of a project or a program. If we want to track the progress of implementation, we see that as a good practice is that ADB itself does not implement a such project. We administer those projects, however, we do regular reviews. And Ellen also mentioned the importance of those regular reviews, and in particular the midterm review, which means that when a project is somewhere in the middle of implementation, that is it is monitored. So it's like across all the activities or all the objectives that the project has there, all kind of reviewed. And that's how we do also. And we think that is important because that is the opportunity when also our implementers, as well as we, can raise some of the concerns and see that if something doesn't work, if something is not progressing, that what can be alternatives or what can be support, for instance, trainings. If it is not moving forward, what is the reason? What can be done? How should we achieve? Should we maybe not have 10 trainings, but have 8 trainings, or maybe we should have 20 trainings because it is going very well. So this is something that really these kind of reviews help us to monitor progress of implementation activities, to monitor progress implementation of certain very specific targets, because targets are good to have. And where possible, again, and where baseline exists, I would say target means that having some numeric, for instance, have 10 trainings or employ 100 person, out of which 30% are women, for instance. So these reviews help us very much to track and see what works, what doesn't work, and what needs to be adjusted. Yes, and I'm sharing a very simple, you probably are thinking, what does it look like? And we saw earlier some other examples of monitoring, but for us, since we look at the projects to have gender features, we form them in as a gender action plan or GESI action plan. It depends. So this is implementation metrics. So we have activities, targets, we have achievements. For instance, as activity, we have trainings. If you see number 1, and then there is specific target percentage. In the achievements, we elaborate, and this we get some, either we do during monitoring or we get it from our implementers, but of course then we go and check and see on place, but then we elaborate what has been achieved and how. So here we can write how was it carried out, what it provided, etc. And the assessment is more whether activity is completed. It can be in most of the cases for the project that are under implementation is in progress, that we usually write. Sometimes we write that not implemented, that also happens. And then that there we, in the assessment section, we then provide further comments, or and during midterm review, we raise that this is not implementing and we need to take action, or why is it pending, etc. But just this is a simple metric. So other organizations may have more Excel sheets, different elaboration. And again, it depends on what is the number of indicators you have, how they are documented in a project. So but I'm sharing how we practice it. Moving to the tips for project monitoring, again, it has to be very systematic monitoring. We need to be clear about what we monitor. Therefore, is it a plan? Are these specific indicators? Are we monitoring activities? And who does it? Sometimes we need a special plan or separate plan for monitoring, and sometimes we don't need it, and it can be very simple. So it depends on the complexity of a project or a program. We have to try to ensure that our monitoring is participatory. So, for instance, in terms of energy project, for instance, provided access to electricity, we may go and talk to government or our implementing partners, ask them what they have achieved. But we may also want to go to communities and hear how talk to them and understand what is the service that they are receiving. Therefore, again, these consultations, data collection is part of this process and can be good practice also. Sex disaggregated data collection has been repeated numerous times, and this is, yes, indeed important, but also analysis, because if we just put it on the shelf, it won't be useful. Therefore, we have to really analyze what the data tells us and how we use and apply that into practice. And doing this in the course of implementation is important, because then program specialists get idea on how to adapt maybe approaches, what needs to be done, and to achieve that final result. There are cases when for instance, there is a need for policy adjustment or policy introduction. In most of the cases, for instance, in ADB projects, this happens from the very beginning. It means that if policy is not part of a project, then later it's difficult to introduce any. However, we have different modalities of programs, and one of them is, for instance, policy loans, here as well, it's important to have analysis to collect data on the gaps of the existing policies and bring evidence how, if we want to introduce gender features or GESI features in policy and make inclusive, how that can change, or what can it bring. Resources is important, because policymakers often think that it costs lots of resources, which is not the case often. Sometimes just we need to analyze what is needed, and I have seen many cases, not only energy, but other sectors, that all the components were there, just little resources were needed to make policy interventions and revisions happen. One of the examples I can recall from our project, like in Nepal, there we started to introduce at the energy utility company level, GESI strategy and operational guidelines, which also from private sector, we have such examples when we look at more on the strategy level of certain organizations or companies, but also as in other sectors as well on the policy level. But for that, the data analysis is really key and important. Again, reviewing and monitoring during implementation is important, because then we see, do we need to introduce major change in a project, or it's just minor revisions, or we don't change anything and we follow the original kind of setting. And it also helps us revise indicators and targets, but this should be a mutual process of exchange, so that we understand the reasons, have justification if we want to change something, or revise and agree on the next steps. I have this question: what are challenges that maybe you have seen for monitoring and implementation? If you have any thoughts, we can get back to it later, or feel free to post in a chat. But there are challenges that, for instance, we have observed. And the first of all is the lack of resources. Even though the projects may have GESI features or gender equality indicators, activities, there are not always resources there, and implementation may not get the right attention, I would say, because there are, sorry, usually my computer, usually for certain sectors, other priorities emerge that really put it a little bit, how to say, don't give priority to gender and GESI. The challenges is that sex disaggregated data collection is not easy, especially if it is a large scale or concern different aspects, but there can be other sources. Sometimes there are some other surveys that are already available. So we should think what are maybe some secondary data sources that we can use to inform our projects and still have sex disaggregated data available. When we go forward with implementation, not always analysis of gender indicators don't happen all the time. And sometimes what we also face is that, especially when it comes those activities that combine not only women's empowerment, but also have aspects of social inclusion and intersect with other groups. So in that case, we may have a very complex activity. For instance, to train 100 women, out of which 30% are women or 20% are from persons with disabilities, and then 10% are from this and this ethnic background. So this way we get a very complex indicator, and implementation is difficult, monitoring is difficult, and if any of the components fail, it means that the whole activity is not completed or is partially done. Therefore, this is a challenge that we see when we look at some of the really GESI indicators, that they can be quite complex. So we should try to perhaps break them down and introduce that this way in project. During implementation, what we see also that there are not enough human resources or financial resources allocated. For instance, gender expert or GESI expert is hired, is involved very late, or there are other challenges that delay implementation. Capacity, or I would say awareness of the issue of how gender and energy are linked can be also low. Therefore, usually there is constant awareness required when we talk to our partners and stakeholders. Involvement with our beneficiaries for feedback and monitoring is important, but you may have other thoughts that you yourself have encountered, and we can discuss them later on. When we come to really completion stage, here it's a good practice to look at what is the broader picture, like outcome of the project, and then output level. So output can be very specific. And for ADB, again, it gets all the aggregated data from projects, regions, sectors. So that's why we present it, and there can be different ways how other similar organizations do it. I think this is the last part, and then we can have a discussion. It's important to analyze what are some of the feedback loops and channels. I think we mentioned that what works, if you look at the study, I don't want to repeat here, but Ellen, I think, also mentioned applying various communication methods, especially for different groups of society, having surveys, baselines, and testimonials. And especially this is something that help us understand what is the impact that we can make with our interventions. What we practice at project completion, if there are resources and time, this is indeed a good practice, is to look at the results in more in-depth way. It mostly happens through collecting qualitative data, like having interviews, going to communities, for instance, where energy services were provided, and talking to women and other groups, how their lives change, in what the project helped them, and collect kind of testimonials from them. So this is something more evaluation, if we say, and see, we just not look at activities, for instance, this was done and this activity implemented, but really see what is the kind of result of it. And for our projects, we draw then very practical benefits and strategic benefits. For instance, when we talk to energy sector, practical benefits can be direct access to electricity connections or alternative energy sources, or time saving, because people can have all the access now. But strategic benefits a bit kind of are more upstream, and in a sense that there are certain improvements that women may experience because of those direct practical benefits. It can be better health, reduced drudgery, or increased engagement in other types of activities. Therefore, practical benefits, and this is again part of evaluation, and we see that this helps us more understand beyond very specific activities and targets what projects have achieved. So practical benefits would be immediate short-term benefits that are brought to women. For instance, they increase knowledge through trainings, right? Or got access directly. But strategic benefits is longer term. So what does it mean? How their status changed? Did they get empowered? Did they start to involve in other types of activities? So this again through our project completion reports, you will see a lot, and it yes requires time, dedication, and resources, because we talk to beneficiaries directly. I think that's it. But we can discuss what can be effective strategies, both for implementation, monitoring, reporting, and ready for questions. And thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chkheidze. It was very, very, I would say, in-depth, and we also got to know, what ADB strategies are, and it's good to learn from, some of the things from your presentation. And I think I would like to take this opportunity to also kind of round off on the entire series and the learnings from all the sessions, and how I could actually, listening to the both of you, it was a good roundup of, of what we'd learned in the previous two sessions. So I think, it kind of gave that, I would say, just like tying up the entire chain of the things that when we had thought and curated this entire series of how we started from the foundational aspects. And in the first CLA, we spoke at length about the foundational, what is GESI, and how GESI is not only about women, which is something, often gets misconstrued, and how, it is important to bring in, and that came out very strongly in your presentation as well, that, when you're talking about a GESI responsive, GESI transformative indicators, you have to think about intersectionality, you have to think about intersecting identities, including, persons with disabilities, women across different, intersectionalities as well. You're talking about race, ethnicity, caste, class. So I think intersectionality kind of, when you bring in that, and it reiterates from what we started on, that gender or GESI is not only about women, which is often how it is, it plays out in this domain specifically. We also spoke about, diversity, equity, and inclusion in our first one at workplace, because that is something that the energy sector still grapples with. We also, and then, we moved on to talking about how to integrate that GESI lens when we spoke about GESI transformative approach, and Ellen kind of also brought in again the theory of change that we had started off on, that when we think about these programs and we think to catalyze the GESI agenda, it is very, very important and mindful to be thinking of the entire theory of change from your inputs to, as you said, the outcomes, but also, the outputs, but also the outcomes. So, practical gender, the practical gender benefits, but also the strategic gender benefits. So, the short-term ones and the long-run ones. And that can happen only when we start to think about GESI or gender as a perspective. And we keep reiterating this across platforms, that you cannot look at this lens as only as a variable or as a checklist. And as you said, that until unless it is integrated at the very first, it's at the beginning and it's set. I think both of you brought out that very strongly, that until unless it is as a lens that is there at the initiation of the project life cycle, it's not going to work. So we need to kind of reiterate this, that, we need to look at GESI and gender as a perspective and not just a variable. So thank you again for, your, I would say, a very, very kind of rounding it off through, this important node of monitoring and evaluation, how to kind of also ensure that you need to still constantly unlearn so that you can learn from what the context throws at you. So as Ellen was talking about the NPSP program, that, even though the indicators were not there at the beginning, like dedicated gender indicators, the gender champion that the COP was, they decided to track those numbers. They decided to bring in that lens. So that readiness, I think, perhaps is what the South Asian region, as you rightly pointed out, Keta, that, that is what I think we lack at. And that is, I think, the baseline that we are now like kind of trying to break through to collecting these, sex disaggregated data, trying to kind of make sure that these indicators are integrated at the very beginning of the project life cycle. And also, I think to just respond to your question of the major challenge that we have also faced in our work in the South Asian region specifically is the mindset and the behavioral kind of change that we kind of, it is difficult to get that buy-in. As you were also mentioning that, it's not like when we talk and initiate a stakeholder for gender, responsive or transformative aspects, the excitement is still not there. And how do we kind of, and I think as gender specialists or as, passionate folks in this domain, that's the I would say that's the T-loss, so to speak, that we kind of work towards. So thank you both, Ellen and Ketevan, for that very, very insightful, session. And I think some of the things that, struck me, I've already mentioned, and you also spoke about things like SMART goals, which is very, very something which often gets missed, because when we are tracking these, as you said, the baselines, because there is so much of lack of data in the domain, and we are assessing the baseline, sometimes it becomes very, very difficult to, if we don't have those SMART goals or SMART indicators, it becomes difficult to track even the baseline to tailor then your solutions. So thank you once again. And we thought this time that as this is our concluding session, we also want to kind of assess the mood of the room before we take up the questions through certain interactive polls on how this series kind of did for them, in terms of learning and understanding GESI concepts. So the first poll that we wanted to take and request our audiences to kind of take it is on understanding these GESI concepts. And now I think you would be able to see the poll and, how well do you understand the basic concepts of gender equality and social inclusion after attending this series is the first question. So I'm going to give it about 30 seconds to our audiences to participate in this poll, and then we can share the results with you. Thank you. I'm going to give another 10 seconds. All right, so I'm going to share the results with you now. And very pleased to share that most of our participants found it very useful. Okay, so now I'm going to excuse me. Now I'm going to share the second poll with you, which is on the impact, which was on our second CLA, in which we thought of, how to integrate GESI in the project design stage. So did this series kind of provide you with the practical strategies to integrate that in your ongoing work? So I'm going to keep this poll live for about 20 more seconds. Thank you for your responses. All right, I see that most of our participants have responded, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you. So as we see, about 88% folks have mentioned that yes, but so largely everybody has said yes, but yes to creating more such series, and we'll be excited to do that for you. The third poll is on the series effectiveness, and now I hope you can see it on the screen. We want to know that if the series was effective for you and it's going to help you enhance the application and understanding of these GESI principles. Thank you for your responses. I see. So I think most of our participants have responded. So I'm going to end this poll and share the results with you. And we see that it has been effective. So thank you for your responses. And the last question, the second last question actually, is on the key takeaways, because we did it on various kind of nodes, starting from importance of GESI, strategies for integration, gender responsive budgeting, and today we learned about monitoring, evaluation, and adaptation. So what were your perhaps key takeaways? And we also have kept the box open for others. And if you have any other key takeaway that you would like for us to kind of take a look at, please write them in the chat box. I'm going to keep the poll live for another 10 seconds. Thank you for your responses. All right. So I think most of our participants have responded. So I'm going to end this poll and share the results with you. I think because most of our participants are also, it was a nascent topic for them. I think the foundational and all the discussions that we've had were interesting and important for them. So thank you for your responses. And of course, the last question that we wanted to ask all of you was on, because we want to keep kind of, curating such knowledge disseminating platforms and engagement platforms. So what are some of the perhaps additional topics that you would like us to cover in the future sessions on GESI and on clean energy? And we would like to kind of take it up in our future engagements. Thank you. Thank you for your responses. And you can also, of course, if you have any other topics, apart from the ones that we've mentioned here, please kindly mention them in the chat box and we will take cognizance of the same. I think most of our participants have responded, so I'm going to end this poll now and share the results with you, in which you can clearly see that we want to have more dialogues and community engagement strategies, because that's one of the challenges that we face in the South Asian context, and also about case studies of successful GESI projects. So thank you so much for that quick session of we just wanted to take cue of what our audiences want and how has this series been. But before now, we would like to kind of request our participants, if you have any questions, you can raise your hands and you can direct those questions to our speakers directly. Or if you want, you can also kind of share your questions on the chat box. Thank you, Savar, for your comment.
I'll go Didi first, since no one's
Sure.
raised their hands.
Sure.
Thank you so much, firstly, to the speakers. I think we had a really interesting and engaging, presentation, and a lot to learn from. I think one thing which will be really useful for a lot of our participants to gain more insight is with regard to, how do these tools on gender, maybe that are being developed by your organizations, help in making timely adjustments to project implementation? I think because that is the key. While not necessarily all gender assessments happen at the beginning. However, if they are tweaked in the midterm or during the course of the program, how do these tools really actually help in making those adjustments?
Sure. Ellen, do you want to respond to it first? Or Dr. Ketevan? I mean, it's open to both of you, I think.
I can
Sure.
start, yes. Yeah, definitely. I think whenever there is an opportunity, or if something hasn't been done from the beginning and it comes in later, I would say it's difficult, but it means that this is something that we can learn from, maybe test or pilot in a given project. So sometimes I would say there is even more openness to introduce certain aspects, because this is not mandatory. So I think it's different when something is mandatory, but then when we see that there is a need for something and can really work well and can bring tangible results, that is what differentiates, I think, the approach from the one that is at the starting point and at a later level. However, it is difficult to integrate. For instance, if we look from ATP perspective and the way we do projects. Therefore, if there are other resources that we can use for piloting certain aspects, that's where we go try to, see other venues or other opportunities. But these can be, for instance, new partnerships or even new features to certain extent, but they may not necessarily become core part of a project. However, all our projects do have lessons learned part in the end that gives impetus for future projects or future project in a country or a sector. So if there are any learnings, for instance, why something wasn't done at the beginning but was interesting to introduce later, that's the learning we can take for our future work. Thank you.
So yeah, in our case, yeah, I agree. If they're not kind of institutionalized, then it's hard to kind of make those adjustments. So at least what I've tried to do on the projects I work on is just try to make that part of even if informally. So like if I visit a project, for instance, and it's just a regular visit, I've tried to incorporate like what we call a pause and reflect session. So I'll try to organize meeting with all the staff working on the program, and not just the leadership, but really the idea is to have everyone who works on implementing feel like they have a stake in it. And so it's just kind of, even if it's an informal meeting, just to see how they feel the GESI aspect of the work is going, what they feel do they feel like they're getting enough support to it's also for me to gauge if there's that enough appreciation of it and how it's helping them meet their own goals, because of course people will be focused on their own goals. Like if you have outcome leads on a project, they're focused on their achieving their specific goals, but you have to make them appreciate that, hey, if for instance you integrate some GESI considerations, it can actually help you achieve better results. So these pause and reflect sessions I've found have been helpful because they have a better appreciation of it. They can let me know, for instance, as the GESI advisor, how I can better support and there have been adjustments made as a result of some of these sessions. So, there are always some small entry points that you can identify, even if they're not formally integrated, even if it's not
Right.
like a formal midterm review, you can find some ways, creative ways.
Thank you so much, because I think that was my follow-up question that, what capacity building measures were actually essential for project teams, and I think, to be able to effectively integrate GESI. So I think that's a great example that not just, we kind of just bring it in between the term of the project, but also kind of institutionalize it to see that how organizations, can actually identify certain checks where it could be just used as trainings or workshops, and also kind of done a pause and reflect. So thank you. That was really useful.
Yeah, I think the training, the GESI training at the start of the project is really critical, but the refresher trainings throughout are important to kind of reinforce the message.
Truly. Yes, I think that's what, like, I mean, as even Keta was saying, that, while mid-review and those mechanisms is supremely important, informal mechanisms are also, and innovative mechanisms are also very, very kind of important to keep the discussion on reviewing what is working, what is not working, important and rolling throughout the project. I would request if there are any other questions for participants to raise their hands and go ahead. And if there are no questions, I would like to kind of play the devil's advocate and my role as a moderator to just kind of request our speakers to kind of leave us with that one thing that they think is absolutely non-negotiable when we are thinking about catalyzing the GESI agenda in the domain of clean energy, and the net zero vision. So that one thing that you think is absolutely critical, would love to hear from the both of you. Ellen, would you like to go first? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. These days I work mainly in the USAID domain, and it's required. I mean, USAID requires that you do the GESI analysis and a GESI action plan. So that's, I think, really essential, so that you have a kind of a blueprint for carrying the work forward and how to integrate it well. But as often a stumbling block that I still run into is the buy-in. Even if it's required, there's still problems garnering that support from even your project leadership. So I think that's a non-negotiable, like getting that support. So even with all the progress that we've made and all that awareness, I think addressing that at the outset is critical, because it will dictate how the work continues, whether it will be a rocky path or not. So, it's not easy. Often I find it's traumatic working on GESI in energy programs, but so that's really critical, I think.
Thank you. Thank you for reinstating that that it is very difficult to push this agenda and then get that first buy-in. But yes, over to you, Keta.
Yes, I think coming from ADB, it's similar. We also even now we have these categories of project, and there is even this category project with no gender elements. We started to reduce the number of such projects being reduced lately. So it means that, and it doesn't come really from top, but it also comes from us, and of course, primarily from the strategy that is a must to have gender assessment and an action plan. Sorry. Therefore, I also think that without this informing a project is, I think, not quite realistic. And we shouldn't be judging whether something may work or not, when qualities don't exist from the desks, because often we would see that, oh, no, there are no inequalities, just women don't want to be involved, or some other statements we hear. And therefore, but we should try, we should go collect, analyze, and then we will see that gender is cross-cutting, inequalities, it's everywhere, and with related to especially those hard sectors as energy. Therefore, that's critical, I would say, to be more open and in terms of testing out, but without assessment and action plan from the beginning, I also don't think reduction of these gaps is possible that relates to particular investment project or program. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you both, Ellen and Dr. Chkheidze. I think as we kind of wrap up this, I think incredibly enriching experience for us, bringing in speakers from various organizations and development partners. I think we have we kind of set the ball rolling, so to speak, on pushing this through more outreach and more knowledge dissemination, aspects and things that we want to do. But also, it has been heartening to, for our participants to reach back to us from the region on follow-ups through mails. So it's been a very heartening kind of experience for that. So as we wrap up, I would also like to request Farah Ahmed, who is the cross-cutting lead at USAID SARA program, to speak about the way ahead on our efforts at catalyzing GESI in the clean energy domain, but also, what we want to do in the hub as a knowledge sharing platform. Just to briefly introduce Farah, she has over 2 decades of experience in the development consulting world, with extensive work on gender, climate, water, etc. So Farah, over to you.
Thank you, Nidhi. Can you all hear me? Yeah, so thank you for this opportunity, I think, to speak at the end and also provide the closing remarks for this initiative. I think I would like to also once again re-emphasize the importance of the South Asia Regional Energy Hub, which highlights actually the importance of how this knowledge sharing platform aims to focus on benefiting our partners in the region. So I think that's the key to begin with. The hub is a knowledge sharing platform for communication and collaboration to support and promote the United States Agency for International Development's energy sector programs in South Asia, primarily in countries including Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. As a knowledge service platform, I think the hub primarily objective is to tell the story of all the programs in South Asia, the energy portfolio, fostering a unified regional voice. I think the common multimedia platform communicates emerging developments, success stories, lessons learned from the ongoing bilaterals, and also the regional activities. It is a unique initiative and originated from the previous USAID's work. So the efforts are to ensure that the hub continues its legacy in South Asia and provides efforts to kind of bridge the knowledge sharing platform, and learning collaboration together. So a few initiatives, actually, I'll just mention in the field of GESI that we've been instrumental in advancing the energy equality and empowering women in South Asia components is we've been quite active in sharing, blogs which focus on the International Women's Day, celebrating the contributions from women and girls in science, also transforming, also looking at how the SARIP Partnership Fund, which showcases the remarkable transformation of rural women into micro enterprises. So we do have a lot of stories from the field that capture capacities building and empowerment related stories that are coming out. The outreach efforts for the hub is, of course, the knowledge sharing series to which we all are a part of. And this has been really useful for us to kind of, bring this rich knowledge of speakers from different organizations to really learn from each other's best practices and knowledge. And I think thank you so much for that ongoing support. We also do ongoing campaigns during the International Women's Day, also organize webinars and knowledge series that bring together senior leaders from the South Asia. And it brings together a flavor of the regional panel, or you could say the voices of the women from the sector. So together we rise, and women lead the energy future is basically what we are trying to really highlight. We've also been very active in participating in some of the international forums like the Asia Clean Energy Forum in Manila, where we highlighted the session on women bridging the clean energy financing, featuring leaders and champions from across Asia and the Pacific. So in the end, I would really encourage all the participants who are also a part of this, the session and the webinar today to really take cognizant of the hub and really contribute and partner with us moving forward, because we are only trying to raise the visibility of how we can collaborate and make this hub beneficial for everybody in the region and not just, focusing in India. I would like, in the end, to thank my heartfelt thank you to our speakers for today, Ellen, Dr. Chkheidze, Monali. Additionally, I want to acknowledge our previous speakers also, Ms. Shruti Swaroop from Embrace Consulting, Dr. Mini Govindan from TERI, Ms. Abhilasha Sood from the UN Women. A special thank you to our team from Workstream 1, Rishti, Ashwarya, Nandita, and of course, Nidhi, who for their dedication and support in really putting this event together. Thank you all your participation and contributions to making this event a success. Together, we can make significant strides together, a more inclusive and sustainable energy future in South Asia. Thank you to all the participants, and we hope to meet you soon again. Thank you.
Then, so I'm going to end the session for today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.